Hello again, and for today we are back on track with the Star Wars content that just never seems to stop. However, we are over halfway through all of the stuff that I want to go through when I'm done with this commentary today. So that is excellent news. And what I will be talking about today is the cultural influence of Star Wars on wider culture and basically what happened when the first Star Wars film dropped and how everything kind of changed because of it. Because Star Wars is one of the biggest franchises of all time, and it did have a dramatic impact on the film industry, on greater science fiction, on everything really. And of course, when you gotta talk about Star Wars, you gotta talk about merchandise, and merchandise was unheard of for movies, and now it is everywhere. And it is because that George Lucas thought that he could further his trilogy if he had control of the merchandising, and the studios were not willing to gamble on that kind of merchandising. And so, bing bang boom, we got the Kenner license, we got all kinds of books, we got comics from Marvel, we got all of this great stuff, and that is what essentially created the Star Wars expanded universe. So all of that kind of content just pushed Hollywood to say, hey, why don't we do tie-ins? Why don't we get merchandising? And so now, it's all a giant merchandising gamble when it comes to movies nowadays, especially the tent poles. Really crazy stuff. As well, we had a lot of ripoffs of Star Wars, and the ripoffs are really ubiquitous, and some of them might even shock you. You got movies like Krull, you got Battlestar Galactica was a dead on ripoff, like the Cylons are just Silver Stormtroopers. You got Battle Beyond the Stars, which was the Roger Corman taking the George Lucas formula of Kurosawa movie plus space equals new thing. And what Battle Beyond the Stars was just Seven Samurai put in space, and really not hard to go from there. We've also got lots of fantasy movies as a result of Star Wars going out there. We got shit like Beastmaster and Conan, and that's kind of what kind of kicked off a lot of the science fiction push of post Star Wars 80s. And it's because the special effects guys at ILM were so able to do literally anything for the industry that they ended up getting all kinds of work constantly. And recently there was the documentary called The Movies That Made Us, and Richard Edlund, who worked on the I believe all three of the Star Wars movies, he ended up making his own company, and they ended up doing Ghostbusters in like with no time really to get everything correct. And this is because of the success of Star Wars, that they needed more than just one special effects house out there. And so this really kind of changed Hollywood for the better, in my opinion, as far as now we can do more things rather than just being limited to all these like human personal stories. However, we do kind of need those back now. And yeah, Star Wars did kind of change storytelling as far as reviving the hero's journey concept from mythology and bringing it back into the larger culture. Because for a while, you had a lot of stories that kind of just were nothing to do with greater mythology. You had all of your anti-heroes in the 70s. You had your like dark morality plays as well, and that's the kind of stuff that doesn't really gel well with the hero's journey. And so this is what was given back. And speaking of the kind of darker stuff, a lot of science fiction in itself before Star Wars was very dark, very dystopian, and essentially these like no hope stories, like which is so funny because it's so like cringy. Zardoz is considered one of these, and Logan's Run and Death Race and all of this shit was just really dark and really not for the youth, or at least for at a certain age. and I could see a lot more young people getting into it. And finally, Star Wars brought back the classical score. There was a time in Hollywood where the classical score was seen as gauche, seen as cliche. And because of the success of John Williams' score, you saw a lot more people wanting to have a classical score in their film to make it grandiose, to make it epic. And this is what Star Wars has brought back to wider Hollywood. But in conclusion, and I know it's really early for a conclusion, but to understand why Star Wars was such a success, you also need to understand the landscape of Hollywood before Star Wars. So there's this period of Hollywood called New Hollywood that Star Wars kind of fell at the end of. And this period was mired in like just insane amounts of creativity, you know, stuff that no one had seen before. Films like Bonnie and Clyde, Easy Rider, and you know, and it also birthed the careers of directors like Francis Ford Coppola, Brian De Palma, Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, Lucas, and a couple others here and there that I'm probably forgetting. But this new Hollywood era essentially revived this dying industry that had nowhere to go, was bought out by multinational corporations who didn't know what the hell to do with anything. And so what they did was they farmed talent out of film school and said, hey, let's give you X amount of money and see what you do. And then they create all these great movies that are now beloved classics. And unfortunately, this is not the period of time that we are in right now. We are in a period of creative stagnation, and this is as a result of all of the great successes and the fact that even bigger multinational corporations have taken over the studio system. And so now there's not only money on the line, but there are shareholders to be pleased every year in every fiscal quarter. And so you can't really take risks anymore, and it's also actively encouraged not to take risks. And so we are now in this really weird period where it's like people want to see more creative stuff, but studios aren't willing to put out money for it. And I think we're going to get to that point again. And I hope I have a big enough career at that point to kind of get picked to make some movies, because, you know, there will be such a creative need for people with good storytelling capabilities in Hollywood that, you know, it will be, you know, ripe for the pickings when it comes to who gets what project. And for some reason they looked really young in New Hollywood, and I think it was because, again, all of the older guys weren't really delivering what they wanted. They were just, you know, being on time, on budget, but, you know, the story really wasn't there for the movie that they were trying to put out. And it caused this desire to find new creative talent. And so if there is a creative dirge in Hollywood, like where there's just a lack of originality, then that's when they're going to start looking again. And as a result of, I think, a lot of these studio purchases and the desire to have more content and the war for attention and all the stuff I normally talk about on this channel, you're going to see people coming out of the woodwork that you never heard before, delivering crazy, crazy good stuff. And this is what we really need right now, because as you can tell from any one of your favorite franchises, they are just in a rut and need to get the franchise Viagra that will help them get back on top. And, you know, we need new franchises, we need new properties, new IPs, and these studios are hungry for them because for some reason they all want a fucking streaming service. And so, in conclusion, Star Wars has had a giant cultural impact. I don't think people really realize it, like, beyond just, like, the fan level and, you know, how successful the movies do. You know, it's like this changed an industry for the better, and I hope that we get something soon that will change the industry for the better, because man, oh man, do we desperately need it? And to the studios out there who refuse to take chances, well then you better tread lightly, because you're all going to get blown away by something that you'll never see coming.